Sergeant Vexthor had been a soldier for 40 years. He fought in 17 different battles across 9 different star systems. He saw empires fall and watched entire armies surrender. In all his years of fighting, he thought he knew everything about war. He was wrong. Everything he believed about combat changed on a small moon orbiting a distant planet. The humans had arrived in this part of space only 3 years before. They built a small mining colony on the third moon of a planet the humans called Kepler 442b. The Krillian Dominion, Vexthor's people, said this was their territory. The humans disagreed. The Krillian High Command decided to remove the humans by force. They said it would be easy. They said the humans would surrender quickly. They said a lot of things that turned out to be completely wrong. Vexthor led 300 elite shock troopers on the attack. Intelligence reports said there were fewer than 60 human defenders at the colony. The colony was just a group of prefabricated buildings clustered around the main mining site. Standard military doctrine said they would win in minutes. Vexthor believed them. He had no reason not to. The first sign of trouble came when their dropships entered the moon's thin atmosphere. Vexthor expected the humans to hide or run away. Instead, a handful of them stood in the open with their weapons raised. They started shooting at the dropships while the ships were still descending from orbit. "They are wasting their ammunition," said Vexthor's second-in-command over the communication channel. "This is suicide." Then the first dropship exploded. A human bullet had hit something critical. The ship spun out of control and crashed into the rocky surface. Then the second dropship exploded. Then a third. The humans were not missing their shots. They were calculating impossible trajectories and hitting weak points that should have been impossible to hit from the ground. Of the 12 dropships in the first wave, only 7 made it down safely. When Vexthor's boots touched the rocky ground, he realized the humans had been preparing for this battle. They had turned the entire mining site into a killing zone. Every approach to the colony was filled with mines. Every corner had a defensive position. Every building had been reinforced and fortified. The humans fought from the shadows, appearing only long enough to fire their weapons before disappearing again. What disturbed Vexthor most was their silence. Krillian warriors roared battle cries to scare their enemies. The Zenthari aliens sang hymns to their war gods. But the humans made no sound except for the crack of their rifles and occasional short radio messages. They fought with cold mechanical efficiency that felt completely alien to Vexthor. The battle continued through the day and into the night. By the time darkness fell, Vexthor had lost half of his 300 soldiers. The humans had lost maybe 10 defenders. Vexthor crouched behind a damaged cargo container, listening to the screams of his wounded soldiers. He sent an urgent message to High Command requesting immediate reinforcements and permission to bombard the colony from orbit. Before High Command could respond, Vexthor received a message from the humans. It came from Captain Jake Morrison, the human colony's military commander. The transmission was brief and simple. "You came to our home. You threatened our families. Now you will learn why humans do not lose wars. We simply refuse to stop fighting." Vexthor would later learn that Jake Morrison was a veteran of something the humans called the Pacific Campaign on their home world. He would learn that humans had spent their entire history fighting wars against each other. They had refined the art of killing to a level that no other species had ever reached. He would learn that every human colonist, even the miners and engineers, had received military training. Every adult human knew how to fight. But in that moment, hiding in the darkness of an alien moon, Vexthor knew only one thing with absolute certainty. He had made a terrible mistake. The Krillian Dominion had awakened something dangerous, something they should have left alone. The battle continued for 6 more days. High Command sent reinforcements. More dropships arrived carrying fresh troops. The assault force grew from 300 soldiers to over 2,000. The humans never numbered more than 60 defenders. But those 60 humans fought like demons. They used the terrain perfectly. They set traps that killed dozens of Krillian soldiers at a time. They seemed to know exactly where the Krillian forces would attack next. They moved through the colony like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Krillians could respond. Every building had to be taken room by room, floor by floor. The humans made the Krillians pay in blood for every meter of ground. On the 7th day, the Krillian forces finally overran the last defensive position. Of the 2,000 Krillian soldiers who had fought in the battle, only 43 survived without serious injuries. The humans lost 27 defenders total, 27 against 2,000. The mathematics were impossible, but the bodies lying in the dust told the truth. Vexthor walked through the ruins of the colony after the battle ended. He saw where the humans had made their stands. He saw the improvised fortifications, the clever traps, the strategic positions. Everything showed careful planning and ruthless efficiency. These were not desperate defenders fighting for their lives. These were professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. In one building, Vexthor found a wall where the humans had written messages. Most were simple farewells to loved ones. But one message caught his attention. It said, "We held them for 7 days. That is 7 days our families had to evacuate. Worth it." Vexthor understood then. The humans at this colony were not trying to win. They were buying time. They knew they would probably die, but they fought anyway to protect others. This concept was difficult for Vexthor to process. Krillian soldiers fought for honor and glory. They surrendered when defeat was certain. But humans seemed to operate on completely different principles. High Command classified the entire incident as top secret. They did not want other Krillian forces to know how badly the battle had gone. But among the soldiers who survived, a new phrase entered their vocabulary. They called it human warfare. The phrase was always spoken in whispers, with a mixture of fear and respect in their voices. Vexthor returned to the Krillian homeworld a changed being. He requested reassignment from combat duty to the training command. His request was approved. He devoted himself to a single purpose. He would prepare Krillian soldiers for the reality of fighting humans. But deep in his heart, he knew that no amount of training could truly prepare anyone for what humans became when you threatened what they loved. The official war between the Krillian Dominion and humanity would begin 2 years later. But for Vexthor, the war began on that moon. That was where he learned the most important lesson any soldier could learn about humans. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to ensure you could never threaten them again. And they were very, very good at it. The Galactic Council had very specific rules about warfare that every civilization was supposed to follow. Medical personnel had to wear clear markings and could not be attacked. Wounded soldiers who surrendered had to be treated with dignity and respect. Biological weapons were completely forbidden. These rules had been observed for thousands of years across hundreds of different conflicts between different species. Then the Council made a catastrophic mistake. They attacked a human medical station. Vexthor heard the story from a Vraxian pilot named Kelth. They met at a neutral space station, far from any active war zones. This station was where soldiers from various species went to drink and try to forget the horrors they had seen. Kelth had the same haunted look that Vexthor had, learned to recognize in anyone who had fought against humans. The target had been a human field hospital on a planet called Novara 7. The hospital was treating wounded soldiers from a battle that had happened the previous week. Intelligence reports suggested the facility was lightly defended. Maybe a dozen soldiers guarding over 100 wounded patients and the medical staff. The Vraxian Fleet Command saw an opportunity. They thought destroying the hospital would lower human morale and show that humans were vulnerable. "We attacked at dawn," Kelth said, his voice translated into flat, emotionless words by the universal translator device. 12 gunships carrying 200 soldiers. We expected them to surrender immediately. They were medics, after all. Healers, not fighters. What the Vraxian commanders did not know was that the human in charge of the facility was a woman named Lisa Hayes. Before the war, she had been a trauma surgeon working in civilian hospitals. She volunteered for the Colonial Medical Corps to help settlers on distant frontier worlds. She had treated thousands of patients over her career. She had saved hundreds of lives. She took an oath to do no harm to any living being. But when Vraxian gunships appeared on the horizon that morning, Lisa Hayes made a choice that would become legend. She walked out to meet us, Kelth continued, his claws trembling slightly as he held his drink. She came out alone with no visible weapon. She requested to speak with our commander under a flag of truce. Our commander agreed because he thought she wanted to negotiate a surrender. Instead, Lisa Hayes delivered a simple message. "You have 30 seconds to leave this area. If you attack this hospital, I can no longer guarantee your safety or the safety of your soldiers." The Vraxian commander laughed at her words. He thought she was bluffing. He gave the order for his forces to open fire on the hospital. What happened next would be classified by both human and Vraxian military commands, but the basic facts could not be hidden. The human medical staff, all of whom had received combat medical training, immediately transformed the hospital into a fortress. The patients who could still walk picked up weapons. The surgeons, with their detailed knowledge of alien biology and anatomy, became expert snipers. They knew exactly where to shoot to cause maximum damage to each species, but it was Lisa Hayes herself who became the subject of nightmares for Vraxian soldiers. She did not just fight back, Kelth whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the bar. She hunted us. She moved through the hospital with a medical scanner in one hand and a rifle in the other. She tracked us like prey. She knew exactly where to shoot to cause maximum pain without immediately killing us. She wanted us to scream. She wanted our soldiers to hear what happens when you break the rules of war. The battle lasted for hours. By the time Vraxian reinforcements arrived from orbit, they found a scene of absolute carnage. Of the 200 Vraxian soldiers who attacked the hospital, fewer than 30 survived. Most of those survivors would never be able to fight again due to their injuries. Meanwhile, the human hospital remained operational. Lisa Hayes was back in surgery, treating the Vraxian wounded with the same professional care she gave to human patients. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her face showed no emotion at all. 3 days after the battle, the Vraxian fleet commander who had ordered the attack on the hospital was found dead in his private quarters. The official report said it was equipment malfunction, but Kelth knew the truth. Several ships in the fleet had intercepted a brief transmission in an unknown code. The transmission came from the planet's surface just hours before the commander died. No one could prove anything, but everyone knew. The humans have a saying, Kelth said quietly. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But I learned a different saying after Novara 7. Never shoot the medic, because the medic knows exactly how to hurt you in return. Vexthor listened in silence. He had heard similar stories from other soldiers. Each story was more disturbing than the last. The humans had a strange capacity for switching between different modes of behavior. They could be compassionate healers one moment, and ruthless killers the next. They switched between these modes with terrifying ease and precision. She received a medal from the human military, Kelth added. The Vraxian prisoners said she continued treating them with perfect professional care after the battle ended. Some prisoners said she even apologized to them while setting their broken bones. She explained that she had to do what was necessary to protect her patients. Did she seem sorry for what she had done? Vexthor asked. Kelth's eyes met Vexthor's across the table. She seemed sad, but not regretful. I think there is a difference between those two things. After the incident at Novara 7, the Galactic Council quietly passed a new resolution. Human medical facilities were to be considered completely off-limits under all circumstances. This was not because of compassion or respect for the rules of war. It was because attacking them proved far too costly. The Council learned that humans would protect their healers with absolutely ferocious violence. Lisa Hayes returned to Earth after the war finally ended. She went back to being a civilian surgeon, working in a hospital and saving lives. She never spoke publicly about what happened at Novara 7, but every military intelligence service in the galaxy kept a detailed file on her. Each file had a simple notation attached to it. The notation read, "Do not engage under any circumstances." Vexthor finished his drink and stood up to leave the bar. Thank you for sharing your story, Kelth. I appreciate your honesty. Why do you collect these stories? The Vraxian asked. What are you hoping to learn from them? Vexthor paused before answering. I am trying to understand them. The humans. I am trying to understand how they can be so full of contradictions. And have you learned anything useful? Yes, Vexthor said quietly. I have learned that humans are not actually contradictory at all. They are perfectly consistent in their behavior. They protect what they love with absolute devotion. Everything else flows from that single principle. The violence, the mercy, the strategy, all of it comes from their desire to protect. He left Kelth sitting alone at the bar, staring into his empty glass. The Vraxian was probably thinking about the same terrifying truth that Vexthor had discovered. Humanity did not fight wars for conquest or glory or territorial expansion. They fought for each other. They fought to protect the people and things they loved. And that single fact made them the most dangerous military force in the known galaxy. Vexthor added Kelth's story to his growing collection of accounts about human warfare. The collection was getting longer every week. He filed this particular story under a new category he had created. He called the category Protective Fury. The category was filling up faster than any other section of his research. As Vex Thor walked through the corridors of the neutral station, heading back to his quarters, he thought about Lisa Hayes. He wondered what she was doing now. Was she teaching young doctors? Was she performing surgeries? Was she living a quiet, peaceful life? Or did she wake up at night, remembering the Vraxian soldiers she had hunted through the corridors of her hospital? Did she feel guilt? Or did she feel nothing at all? Vex Thor suspected he would never know the answer. But he knew one thing with certainty. He would never, ever want to be on the wrong side of a human protecting someone they cared about. That was a lesson worth learning, even if the cost of that lesson had been paid in blood. Vex Thor's research into human warfare eventually led him to conduct a direct interview with a human prisoner. The prisoner's name was Ryan Cole, a human lieutenant who had been captured during the Battle of Arcturus Station. He had been held in a Krillian detention facility for 6 months. Vex Thor received special permission from High Command to question him about human military doctrine and strategy. The interview room was completely standard. It had reinforced walls, monitoring equipment, and a simple table separating the interrogator from the prisoner. Ryan Cole sat calmly in his chair. His hands were not bound, following the Geneva Conventions that humanity had insisted must be applied to all galactic conflicts. He looked completely unremarkable for a human. He was average height, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing nothing. "Lieutenant Cole," Vex Thor began carefully, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me today." "I did not have much else on my schedule," Ryan replied with a slight smile on his face. "And please just call me Ryan." Vex Thor appreciated the casual tone. It would make the conversation flow more naturally. "I have been studying human military history extensively. Your species has been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. Thousands of conflicts, millions of casualties. I want to understand why this happened." Ryan leaned back in his chair, thinking about the question carefully. "That is a very complicated question to answer. Humans fight for many reasons: resources, ideology, territory, religion, pride. I suppose these are the same reasons that any species fights wars. But the scale of it," Vex Thor pressed forward. "Your world wars. The atomic weapons you used against each other. You nearly destroyed your entire civilization multiple times." "Yes, we did." Ryan's expression became more serious. "And that is exactly why we are so effective at warfare now. We learned every possible lesson the hard way. We made every mistake that could be made. We pushed warfare to its absolute limits and looked directly into the abyss of total destruction. And what did you see when you looked into that abyss?" "We saw ourselves," Ryan said quietly. "We saw what we are capable of when we stopped thinking of the enemy as actual people. So we created rules. The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions detailed rules of engagement. Not because we went soft or became weak, but because we knew we desperately needed limits. Without those limits, we would have exterminated ourselves completely." Vex Thor found this absolutely fascinating. "So these rules actually make you weaker as a military force?" Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "No, Sergeant. The rules make us sustainable. They allow us to fight wars without destroying our own sense of humanity in the process. But here is what your commanders completely fail to understand. Those rules only apply to how we treat each other. They only apply to fellow humans." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Vex Thor felt his spines prickle with sudden unease. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean we extended those rules to your species out of basic courtesy and respect. We assumed other species would want to fight with honor and restraint just like we do. But you are not bound by our history. You do not carry our guilt. You do not have our self-imposed limitations. So every single time you break those rules, you remind us what we are truly capable of when we remove the gloves." Vex Thor thought immediately of the medical station on Novara 7. "I am beginning to understand what you mean." "I do not think you fully understand yet," Ryan said, leaning forward in his chair. "Let me tell you a story. There was a human soldier named Kyle Chen who was captured by Krillian forces early in the war. They tortured him for information. They broke his fingers one by one. They starved him. They kept him in complete isolation for weeks. This was all standard interrogation procedure according to your military's protocols." Vex Thor had read the classified reports about this incident. He revealed no classified information during his interrogation. "Correct. because we train extensively for that exact situation. But here is the important part of the story. Kyle was eventually released in a prisoner exchange 3 months later. Do you know what happened next? He returned to active duty. He returned to duty, Ryan confirmed with a nod. But he specifically requested reassignment to Special Operations Forces. Within 6 months, he had volunteered for a very dangerous mission to infiltrate a major Krillian supply base. He went in with 5 other soldiers. Do you know what they did once they got inside? Vexthor did not answer. He waited silently. They did not kill anyone. They did not destroy anything. Instead, they left gifts, care packages containing food, medicine, and entertainment materials. Each package contained a handwritten note that said, "From Lieutenant Kyle Chen with gratitude for the hospitality." Your commanders thought it was just psychological warfare, and it was psychological warfare. But the real message was not for your commanders. The real message was for Kyle himself. I do not understand the purpose of this. Kyle needed to prove something to himself. He needed to prove that he was still fundamentally human. That torture had not transformed him into something else. So he showed mercy when he easily could have shown vengeance instead. That is the thing about humans, Vexthor. We can absorb incredible amounts of punishment. We can survive things that would completely break most other species. But we desperately need to believe we are the good people in the story. We need that narrative to maintain our sense of identity. Ryan's eyes locked directly with Vexthor's. But take that away from us. Convince us that the enemy is completely irredeemable. Make us believe that no mercy is possible or appropriate. And you will face something much worse than professional soldiers. You will face humans who have absolutely nothing left to prove to themselves. Is that a threat against the Krillian Dominion? It is a sincere warning from someone who actually likes you, Ryan said, and his smile returned, though it looked sad. I volunteered for this interview because I could see what you are doing with your research. You are trying to understand us. You are trying to find a way to end this war without complete annihilation of one side or the other. That is genuinely admirable, but you need to understand something absolutely fundamental about humans. What is that? We do not have a warrior caste like some species. We do not have soldiers who are bred specifically for combat. Every single human you fight is someone who actively chose to be there. Someone who is protecting something they deeply love. A planet, a family, an ideal, a principle. And when you threaten that, you are not facing trained professional killers. You are facing ordinary people who have made a conscious decision that some things are worth dying for. Vexthor was silent for a long moment, processing this information. What would you do if I released you from custody right now? Ryan considered the question very seriously. I would thank you sincerely. I would probably shake your hand. Then I would return to my unit immediately and continue fighting. Not because I hate you personally, but because my friends are still out there in the war, and I will never abandon them. Even knowing that you might die in the next battle, especially knowing that I might die. That is what makes the choice meaningful. The interview continued for 3 more hours. They discussed tactics, strategy, the fundamental nature of courage and fear. Ryan answered every question with complete honesty, holding back only specific information that could directly endanger human military forces. When they finally finished, Vexthor found himself respecting this human more than he respected many of his own Krillian officers. As guards arrived to escort Ryan back to his cell, the human paused at the doorway. Hey, Vexthor, when this war finally ends, and it will end eventually, you should look me up. I will buy you a drink. You seem like someone genuinely trying to do the right thing. That is actually pretty rare in any species. Vexthor watched him leave, then turned back to his extensive notes. He had hours of recorded conversation to review and analyze. But one phrase kept echoing repeatedly in his mind. Ordinary people who have decided that some things are worth dying for. That night, Vexthor composed a detailed report to High Command. The core message was brutally simple. Humanity could not be defeated through conventional warfare. The Krillian Dominion had to find another path forward. The report was immediately classified as top secret and filed away. But Vexthor knew he had planted an important seed in the minds of his superiors. The war would continue for another full year. But eventually, someone in the Krillian High Command would read his carefully chosen words and reach the same inevitable conclusion. And when they did, real peace would finally become possible between their species. The story that haunted Vexthor more than any other came from a Thracian mercenary named Gorvak. The Thracians were a species of large, heavily armored aliens who sold their military services to the highest bidder. Gorvak had fought as part of a coalition force against a human outpost on an ice world called Fenris Prime. It was a story about 150 human soldiers who absolutely refused to surrender, even when surrender was their only logical option for survival. Gorvak told the story in a bar on a neutral space station. His massive frame was hunched over the counter. His 3 eyes were glazed from too much alcohol and too many terrible memories. Vexthor had specifically sought him out after hearing whispers that Fenris Prime had psychologically broken entire units of experienced combat veterans. "They call it the Frozen Hell," Gorvak began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the air, "and that name has nothing to do with the weather conditions. The coalition had sent 12,000 troops to capture the outpost. This was a massively disproportionate force for such a small target. But military command had learned to be extremely cautious when dealing with human defensive positions. The outpost itself was just a research station, studying the planet's unique geological properties. It was staffed by civilian scientists and protected by a single company of human marines. Captain Ben Walker commanded the human military forces at the station. According to all available intelligence reports, he was a career officer with a competent but unremarkable service record. The coalition commanders expected him to negotiate a reasonable surrender when faced with such overwhelming numerical superiority. "We gave them every possible chance to avoid bloodshed," Gorvak said heavily. "We offered safe passage off the planet for all civilian personnel. We even offered the military personnel honorable prisoner status with full Geneva Convention protections." Do you know what Walker said in response? Vexthor waited patiently for the answer. He said, and I quote exactly, respectfully declined, "We will wait here for our relief forces to arrive." Gorvak's laugh was bitter and harsh. Relief forces were at least 3 weeks away at minimum travel speed. He had to know they would not arrive in time. He had to know his people would all die. The coalition forces attacked at dawn on the 3rd day after delivering their surrender ultimatum. They expected to completely overrun the outpost within a few hours at most. Instead, they walked directly into an absolute masterpiece of defensive military engineering. Walker had used those 3 days to transform the research station into an incredibly effective fortress. He utilized the ice itself as both protective shield and offensive weapon. The humans had strategically collapsed tunnels to create choke points. They established perfectly overlapping fields of fire. Every approach to the station became a killing zone. But what made Fenris Prime truly legendary in military history was not the brilliant tactics. It was the humans themselves and their refusal to break. They fought continuously for 3 full weeks, Gorvak said very quietly. 3 weeks of constant combat. We threw absolutely everything at them. Artillery bombardment, armored vehicles, air support, even chemical weapons. We lost hundreds of soldiers for every single meter of ground we managed to advance, and the humans just would not stop fighting. Vexthor had read the official after-action reports. The humans had given nicknames to their various defensive positions. Names like the Alamo, Thermopylae, Bastonia, and Rourke's Drift. Each name referenced a famous last stand from human military history, places where outnumbered defenders had held against impossible odds. It was a clear message to the attackers. We have done this before throughout our history, and we will do it again here. By the 2nd week of fighting, we had completely cut them off from everything, Gorvak continued. No food supplies, no water, no power generation, nothing. The external temperature was minus 50 degrees Celsius. The internal temperature was not much better. We intercepted their radio communications. They were stretching single-day ration packets to last 3 full days. They were melting ice for drinking water. They were burning furniture and equipment to generate heat. They had dozens of seriously wounded soldiers who desperately needed medical evacuation. And they still refused to surrender? Vexthor asked. Worse than that, they started singing. Gorvak's voice cracked slightly with emotion. We would launch an assault on a position. We would lose dozens of good soldiers taking it. And then we would hear them singing human war songs from their ancient history, old songs from wars fought thousands of years ago. Songs about brothers fighting side by side. Songs about last stands and never giving up. It was absolutely terrifying in a way I cannot properly explain. Vexthor remained completely silent, letting the mercenary continue his story. On day 18 of the siege, we finally breached the inner compound defenses. We thought the battle was finally over. We were completely wrong about that. Gorvac drained his glass in one gulp. Walker had pulled all remaining personnel back to the main research building. Maybe 40 soldiers were still alive at that point. Half of them were seriously wounded. We outnumbered them 300 to 1 by that stage of the battle. The coalition commander sent one final surrender ultimatum directly to Walker. The response came back immediately. Just 3 words in total. Come and take. We lost 200 soldiers taking that single building, Gorvac said, his voice barely above a whisper. 200 trained professional soldiers against 40 half-dead humans defending individual rooms and hallways. They fought with combat knives when their ammunition ran out. They fought with their bare hands when the knives broke. Walker himself personally killed 7 coalition soldiers before we finally brought him down with concentrated fire. He died in the fighting? Eventually, yes. Gorvac's expression was deeply haunted. But not before he triggered the research station's emergency self-destruct system. He destroyed all the valuable geological data we had come to capture. The massive explosion killed another 100 of our soldiers who were inside the building.
In the end, the entire operation was completely pointless.
We gained absolutely nothing. Vexthor processed this information carefully. Why did they not surrender? They could have easily saved their own lives and the lives of your soldiers. That is exactly what our commander desperately wanted to know. We managed to capture 3 human survivors from the battle. All 3 were critically wounded and barely conscious. One of them was a corporal named Amy Scott. She was barely alive when we found her in the rubble. Do you know what she said to us? Vexthor waited, she said, and these were her exact words. We held for 21 days. The record at Bastonia was 18 days. We beat the old record. Gorvac shook his head slowly. She was actively dying. Half her body was severely burned, and she was proud that they had beaten some ancient historical record from a war fought thousands of years ago. What happened to the 3 survivors? We actually tried to treat their injuries and save their lives. Part of us deeply respected what they had accomplished, even though we could not understand their reasoning. But Amy Scott died 2 hours after we found her. The other 2 survivors lived, but they never spoke another word. They just stared at us with these completely empty eyes that showed nothing. Gorvac ordered another strong drink before continuing his story. The coalition lost over 3,000 soldiers taking Fenris Prime. 3,000 dead against 150 humans. The tactical value of the outpost was absolutely minimal. We gained nothing of value, but every single soldier who fought in that battle understood something important afterward. What was that? That humans do not fight wars the way other species do. For us, for most species, war is primarily about achieving objectives. Territory, resources, strategic advantage. We carefully calculate costs versus benefits. We surrender when the mathematics stop making logical sense. Gorvac's 3 eyes focused intently on Vexthor. But humans are completely different. They fight for each other. They fight for pride and honor. They fight for symbols and ideals. They fight for the idea that some things are worth dying for, even when dying serves absolutely no practical military purpose whatsoever. That seems completely illogical. That is humanity, Gorvac said simply as he stood up to leave. The relief force that the humans were waiting for finally arrived 23 days after the siege began. They were 2 days too late to save anyone. They found the complete ruins of the outpost and a message that Walker had personally carved into the ice with a knife. The message said only 2 words they held. That was everything. What happened after the relief force arrived? The human relief force carefully examined the carnage. They saw the makeshift cemetery where we had buried their dead with military honors. They read those 2 words carved into the ice. Gorvac's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then they hunted us. For 3 solid months, they systematically hunted down every military unit that had participated in the battle at Fenris Prime. They picked us off one by one, squad by squad. It was not warfare anymore. It was pure revenge. Cold, calculated revenge. Did they eventually find you? No. I deserted my unit and fled to neutral space where I have remained ever since. Half my unit made the same choice. The ones who stayed and... The war finally ended not with a massive climactic battle, but with a simple conversation between former enemies. Vexthor found himself directly in the center of that conversation. He had been personally selected to represent the Krillian Dominion at the first official peace conference. Sitting across the negotiating table from him was a human delegation led by a woman named Kate Foster. She was a veteran diplomat who had survived the complete destruction of 3 different embassies during the brutal conflict. The peace conference took place on a neutral space station in unclaimed territory. Representatives from 24 different species attended the meetings. The conference room was deliberately austere and plain. There were no decorations, no comfortable furnishings, nothing to distract anyone from the brutal work of ending a war that had already cost millions of lives across dozens of different worlds. Kate Foster spoke first at the opening session. Before we begin discussing specific terms and conditions, I want everyone in this room to understand something very clearly. Humanity does not want this war to continue. We never wanted it to begin, but we will absolutely not beg for peace, and we will not accept any surrender terms that compromise our fundamental sovereignty or our basic safety. The Vraxian ambassador immediately bristled with anger. You speak from a position of obvious weakness. Your military fleets are dangerously overextended across too many systems. Your colonies are under constant siege. And yet we are still actively fighting, Kate interrupted him sharply. Still holding every important position. Still making you pay an enormous price in blood for every meter of territory. How many more soldiers are you willing to sacrifice just to prove a point that nobody cares about? The entire room fell into uncomfortable silence. Vexthor had personally seen the latest casualty reports from the front lines. The coalition was consistently losing 5 soldiers for every single human casualty. The brutal mathematics of attrition were completely unsustainable for the coalition forces. We are all here today because both sides finally recognize a simple truth, Vexthor said carefully, choosing each word with precision. This war has no possible winner anymore. It only has survivors. The only real question is whether we can find terms that are acceptable to all parties involved. Kate's eyes met Vexthor's across the table. He saw something there in her expression, not hatred or anger, but deep exhaustion. Sergeant Vexthor, I have read your detailed reports and analysis. Your research on human warfare has been circulating through our intelligence services for months now. It is remarkably accurate in its assessments, and surprisingly respectful in its tone. I have tried very hard to understand your species properly. And what have you concluded from your research? Vexthor chose his next words extremely carefully. I have concluded that humans are natural survivors. You have built your entire civilization on the edge of complete extinction. You fought first against each other in terrible wars, then against your harsh environment, then against the stars themselves as you expanded outward. You do not seek military glory or territorial conquest. You seek security and safety for the things you love, and you will pay absolutely any price necessary to achieve that security. Kate nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. That shows more genuine insight than most of your high command has demonstrated during this entire war. So let me be equally direct and honest with you. We know perfectly well that we cannot win a total victory. We also know with certainty that you cannot defeat us completely. We are locked in a stalemate that will continue grinding up lives on both sides until one entire civilization finally collapses from pure exhaustion. What do you propose as a solution? Mutual recognition of all territorial claims. Establishment of demilitarized buffer zones between our respective spheres of influence. A joint commission to investigate war crimes committed by both sides. And reparations. Not punitive reparations designed to cripple economies, but sufficient compensation to rebuild what was destroyed by this pointless war. The Thracian delegate actually laughed out loud at her words. You seriously demand reparations from us? After everything? I demand basic fairness, Kate replied in an ice-cold voice. Your coalition started this war by deliberately attacking civilian targets without any provocation. We responded to your aggression. Now we all must pay the cost of rebuilding what was destroyed. The detailed negotiations lasted 6 full weeks. Vexthor personally participated in every single session. He found himself increasingly impressed by Kate Foster's ability to perfectly balance firmness with practical pragmatism. She never made threats. She never bluffed about her position. But she also never wavered on core principles that mattered to humanity. During a scheduled recess in the 3rd week of negotiations, Vexthor found himself sharing a quiet meal with Kate in the station's observation lounge. Earth was clearly visible through the massive viewport, appearing as a beautiful blue marble suspended against the infinite darkness of space. That is home, Kate said very quietly, staring at her planet. 8 billion people down there who just want to live their normal lives without someone constantly trying to conquer them. I understand completely. I have hatchlings of my own. Grandchildren now, actually. Kate smiled genuinely for the first time since negotiations began. Then you understand perfectly why I absolutely cannot compromise on security guarantees. Those people down there, including my own daughter, need to know with certainty that they are safe. You have a daughter. She is 12 years old now. She has lived literally half her entire life during this terrible war. I desperately do not want her to live the other half of her life preparing for the next war. Vexthor felt something shift fundamentally in his perspective. Throughout the entire war, he had studied humans primarily as soldiers, warriors, and fighters. But they were also parents, children, and lovers. They were people who wanted exactly the same basic things as any other species in the galaxy. I have a confession to make, Vexthor said slowly. I have been systematically collecting stories about human warfare, trying to understand how you fight and why you fight the way you do. I thought if I could properly explain it to our high command, they might finally see a realistic path toward peace. Did your strategy work? I think so. Otherwise, we would not be sitting here today having this conversation. Kate considered this carefully. Will you tell me one of your collected stories? Vexthor thought for a long moment, then told her the complete story about Fenris Prime. He described in detail the 150 soldiers who held their position for 21 days, who chose to die rather than surrender, who sang their ancient war songs while their outpost burned and collapsed around them. When he finally finished the story, Kate remained silent for a very long time. That was Ben Walker's company, she said at last. I knew him personally. He was my husband's best friend from their time in the military academy together. I am truly sorry for your loss. Please do not apologize. Ben made his own choice. They all made their choices freely, and their choice matters enormously. Not because they died, but because they made the enemy pay such a terrible price that your high command finally decided this war was not worth continuing. Kate's voice remained perfectly steady and controlled. Every single soldier who died in this war bought us leverage at this negotiating table. I absolutely will not waste what they purchased with their lives. The peace negotiations finally concluded 2 weeks later. The treaty was formally signed on a crisp autumn day, with official delegations from all participating parties present to witness it. The terms were not perfect. Compromises never are perfect. But they were acceptable to all sides. More importantly, they included strong enforcement mechanisms that would make the treaty actually work. As Vexthor prepared to return home to Krillian space, Kate approached him one final time. I want to give you something important, she said, holding out a small data storage chip. This contains every story we have carefully documented about soldiers from both sides who showed genuine honor during this terrible war. Acts of mercy, restraint, and courage. The soldiers who remembered they were fighting against people, not mindless monsters. Why are you giving this to me? Because wars eventually end, Sergeant, but stories last forever. When our grandchildren ask us what this war was truly about, I want them to hear both sides of the story. I want them to know that even in the darkest possible times, some people still chose compassion over cruelty. Vexthor accepted the chip, feeling its slight weight in his claws. Will we fight again someday? Humans and Krillians? Kate looked out at the vast field of stars visible through the viewport. I honestly hope not, but I know better than to promise eternal peace between our species. What I can promise is this. If we do fight again someday, it will be because both sides genuinely believe they have absolutely no other choice. And maybe, just maybe, the stories we tell about this war will help prevent that from ever happening. Vexthor returned to his homeworld and immediately presented his complete findings to the War Academy. His research was quickly incorporated into the standard curriculum as required reading for all officer candidates. The section on human warfare became the most intensely studied, most discussed, and most feared part of the entire